Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. Let's talk boxing. I've just rewatched Tyson Fury against Francis Ngannou. We'll talk about some of the technical elements that people are overlooking, some of the narratives that are being put out there. But the reason I'm bringing that up is to feed into the real question of this particular video. How will Francis Ngannou cope if he is to stick around in boxing? The rumours are that the WBC are looking to give him a top 10 ranking. If he sticks around, can he be competitive against some of the other top 10 guys? We'll talk about that. First and foremost, I rewatched the fight. I had it 7 rounds to 3 for Tyson Fury. The first time I watched it live, I thought it was 6-4, 7-3, leaning more towards 6-4. This time, the swing round, I felt maybe Fury edged it. Whichever way you go, I can't see where you would give 5 rounds to Ngannou. I do think that Fury definitely won the fight. A lot of people have questioned that. They've said, Chris, you're scoring volume too much rather than power. In other words, if you're landing pillow-fisted punches and the other guys are landing damaging shots, surely you give it to the guy that's landing damaging shots. I agree with you. The problem is that you score boxing round by round. And outside of round 3 and 8, what damage did Ngannou really put on Tyson Fury? In other words, Fury's landing some really solid shots at points. The fact that Ngannou's able to take them doesn't mean that they're pillow-fisted punches or that he's not punching through the target or that he's just flicking his hand out there. They're significant strikes. The problem is Ngannou's able to take them. Well, in the rounds, therefore, that Fury's also able to take Ngannou's significant strikes and he's not being clearly affected and buzzed and stuff like that. You can't just say, I'm going to assume Ngannou wins the fight because I believe he's the heavier-handed guy. Otherwise, the heavier-handed guy is always going to win on your card. It's such a subjective way of observing. In other words, if Fury lands 10 punches and Ngannou lands 5, and Ngannou doesn't hurt Fury, and you're going to give it to Ngannou just because you think he's the heavier-handed puncher, why not give it to him if he only lands 4? Why not 3? What if he only lands 1 punch in the entire round? Well, Fury's were pillow-fisted, right? And Ngannou's was solid. That's why the only way you can swing to that concept is if Ngannou was to hurt Fury. If he lands 3 punches, but they hurt him, they buzz him, they affect him, well then sure, I'm going to give it to Francis Ngannou. But if that doesn't happen, I'm going to give it to the guy who's landing clean and effective punches. They still have to be clean punches. Bear in mind, I used to talk a lot to Peter Fury, a gentleman of a man. What a great guy. And I was really rooting for Hughie to have a terrific career. And I really hope he can get over his health issues and become what he wanted to become. Because, listen, Peter is just such a gent. And you couldn't help but root for him. This is way before he became famous, right? Well, when he fought Joseph Parker, the Fury clan were in uproar. They felt he beat Parker. I could have, as a biased person, come out here and said, Hughie Fury won that fight. I felt that Joseph Parker won the fight. Why? Because although there were a lot of flicking shots from Hughie, they were flicking shots. He wasn't punching through the target. In other words, I'm not saying as long as you make contact, it counts as a punch. It still needs to be a clean shot. But if it is a clean shot, you can't be too subjective about what you think constitutes a solid shot. They were landing shots on each other that weren't affecting each other at points. And they were landing shots on each other that were solid shots at points. You have to take that into account. In addition to that, a lot of the shots that Ngannou was landing were being blocked. They were being rolled with. They were clipping shoulders. They were hitting biceps. And the crowd would be going, ooh and ah. And the corner of Ngannou was very vocal. And the commentary team, who did a terrible job, they were all over the place with it, giving him so many props. And I get that. He deserves props. And a lot of people expected it to be easy. And that can affect how people interpret the fight. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these shots were not landing, and you have to take that into consideration when you're talking about Ngannou fighting other top 10 guys. Because there are certain things he was getting credit for in this fight that you're not going to get credit for in the future. They're not scoring moments. For instance, there was a moment where Tyson Fury was dragged to the floor, and the commentary team were in awe of Francis Ngannou's strength. There was another moment where he sort of got pushed, and he looked ragged Fury. He lost his feet as he went into the turnbuckle, but no punches landed. Fury then lands a couple of solid punches. In both of those examples, it's Fury winning those exchanges. The fact that Fury's losing his footing because he's been bumped or pushed, that doesn't win Ngannou the exchange. You see what I'm saying? And so you have to take that into account, because if he's fighting an Anthony Joshua and the commentary team is covering it differently, well, then your interpretation might be different. Don't get thrown by the commentary, by the crowd, by the corner. What is landing? And so if we're talking about Ngannou, though, there is a certain set of attributes, a skill set, which is certainly impressive. He's a guy whose timing is very, very good. He was very calm under pressure. He had a terrific chin. And that meant that he was willing to be able to allow Fury to come onto him, throw a shot, and because of those long arms, he knows he can reach him as he's pulling out. And Fury was making the error sometimes of pulling out without his guard up or without changing the level in a straight line. That can get you caught. And we'll talk about why that might be significant with some of the other top 10 guys in a moment. And I also have to give a shout out to somebody, okay? There's a guy on Twitter who I love debating with because I disagree with him very, very often. But as I've always said on this channel, I don't have a problem with disagreeing with people as long as you are polite, And as long as you can put your argument together in an intellectual way, I enjoy it. What is the point in having a boxing channel if we can't share views with each other? I'm not looking for an echo chamber. I'm not employed by anyone where I've got, a vested interest in influence in public opinion either. Well, Thomas is a guy who always puts his arguments together in a very intelligent way. You can find him on Twitter at Thomas91762700. I'll put the image up on the screen so you can see it as well. He's made a couple of points in the build up to this fight, and I actually retweeted him on Twitter at the time, and I said, does Thomas have a point? And the vast majority of people, myself included, disagreed with Thomas. Well, he's had the last laugh now, because a lot of what he said has added up. He was saying this is going to be a tough fight for Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury is going up against a guy who's got a unique set of skills, really physically strong. This is a guy that can punch, he can bang, and he's actually got great timing. He's a top-class striker, of course. Even though it's a UFC, he's still a fighter, he's a martial artist. The fact of the matter is, Ngannou has more chance against Tyson Fury than many of the other top 10 heavyweights. And at the time I was thinking, come on Thomas, man, he's never put on a pair of boxing gloves. But Thomas's argument was, listen, try and understand that, yeah, sure, Fury's going to be more skilled than him, but Fury's going to be a lot more skilled than all the other top, or most of the other top 10 heavyweights anyway. And for those that don't have a punch on them, they don't even have a puncher's chance. At least Ngannou's got the ability to be able to set up a big individual shot. So whilst you don't expect him to outbox Tyson Fury, he might have enough individual moments to take him out. Now, in fairness, I agreed to an extent with Thomas, because in the build-up to this fight, when I was talking about the preview, I gave you footage of the fight between McGregor and Floyd Mayweather, and I showed you how on numerous occasions Conor was walking Floyd onto uppercuts, but because he doesn't have the individual single punch knockout power that a big punching heavyweight like Ngannou will have, he couldn't then capitalize on that. Floyd's able to readjust, stabilize the situation, and take over. Whereas with Ngannou, you might not get the opportunity to readjust, and it nearly played out that way. If he had gone down and not recovered, that would have been an example of Fury being made to pay for an error because he got greedy. He threw a 1-2. Didn't exit the pocket completely, stayed on the edge of range, threw another 1-2 when Ngannou has now planted his feet. There's no lateral movement to get him to reset. And then you've been made to pay the price with a really nice European hook where he had his palm down rather than up. So as Fury's throwing the right hand, he's trying to hide behind that shoulder. If he's thrown it with a palm facing himself, the bottom knuckle could clip the shoulder and so it doesn't have an effect. By throwing a European hook palm down, he's able to squeeze it over that little gap. Now, whether that was instinctive and he just threw the hook like that just because he threw it, or whether he noticed a pattern, only Ngannou knows. But if he noticed a pattern, he's a thinking fighter too. But the point I'm making here is that Thomas was arguing this is going to be a tough fight, and in any given moment Fury could lose this fight. Here's some of the things that Thomas was saying which potentially applies moving forward. He said, when you're talking about UFC versus MMA, consider certain triangle theories, which don't always apply in boxing, but consider this. Maldonado was an MMA journeyman who went 10 round distance with Rivas and Takam in boxing. When he fought Miocic in the UFC, he lasted 35 seconds with those small mitts on. He then went on, Miocic, to fight Francis Ngannou, and he landed 82 strikes, but he didn't put a dent in him. So an MMA fighter who was able to go in against some good sort of B-status guys at heavyweight and go the distance, Rivas was even a bit of a puncher, he dropped Dillian White, remember, he wasn't able to last 35 seconds against Miocic. So Miocic can obviously bang with the small mitts on. Well, Miocic, with 82 strikes, couldn't affect Francis Ngannou. He also points to the MMA journeyman Greg Hardy, who's ranked 95th in the world with BoxRec at the moment after just 3 fights. Now, Greg Hardy, in his 3 fights, has beaten Michael Cook, Hassan Rahman Jr. and Gregory Corbin. Now, Gregory Corbin had been inactive. He hadn't fought for a few years, I think. But if you look on paper, Corbin had gone 8 rounds with Charles Martin, 6 rounds with Joe Casamano, 3 rounds with Shaw. Hardy got him out in 2. Only Hrgovic had got him out earlier than that. In addition to that, Hardy took out Neely in that little tournament where they were doing these 1-round tournaments that Michael Hunter entered and stuff like that. He took him out in 1 round. Michael Hunter couldn't do that. And he's come over to boxing and he hasn't shamed himself. Well, the likes of Hardy and Maldonado are nothing compared to Francis Ngannou. So why are you assuming that Ngannou wouldn't be able to have more of an effect, more of an impact on this particular sport? And to be fair, at the moment, he's winning the debate, Thomas, isn't he? But does that mean I'm ready to suddenly say this guy's one of the top fighters in the world? You see, one of the things you have to understand is that Tyson Fury didn't have a blueprint coming into this fight. There are certain things he didn't know. So when he got greedy and he threw 2 big 1-2s in a row and he ended up getting caught, there were question marks, weren't there, in the build-up to this fight? Will Francis Ngannou's power actually carry into boxing? Because it's different when you're wearing these little mitts and it's different when you're wearing big gloves, right? Is he going to be in a position where he can take the pressure? Is the stamina going to affect him? How's he going to cope when Tyson Fury decides, I'm going to try and put it on him and affect his construct? I'm going to bump him. I'm going to get close up to him. He doesn't know these things. He's got to test them. Whereas now other fighters would have seen that. And they'll say, listen, man, we know from the Fury situation, Ngannou's a strong dude. I don't want to be getting into too many clinches and trying to push him back. That ain't going to work. In addition to that, I can't be staying at mid-range and exchanging with Ngannou because the power's real. On top of that, I can't be exiting in straight lines with my guard down. Because although Tyson Fury is certainly rolling with a lot of shots, they're coming off biceps, forearms, shoulders and stuff like that, the fact of the matter is, if I make one error and he catches me on my exit, he's got the power to take me out. So now you start to have things that you need to be careful of. That puts Ngannou at a disadvantage compared to what the other top 10 guys might have if they end up facing him, right? Antithetically to that, Ngannou now has experience, and he's going to have more experience moving forward. So that could help Ngannou as well. But let's talk about individual top 10 fighters. Take Alexander Usyk, for example. I think Usyk would be a terrible matchup for Francis Ngannou. This is a guy that can exit the pocket very quickly, get you resetting, but he also sets a tempo, and he lands backhands to the body consistently. And we didn't see Fury go to the body as much against Francis Ngannou as he normally does. Why? Because to do that, when Fury's at his best to the body, it's when he's actually up close. And he didn't want to be up close exchanging at mid-range. So the threat of Ngannou stopped Fury from operating there. On occasion, Fury was getting low and landing jabs to the body, the solar plexus, and he was getting timed on a couple of occasions. There was one left hook in the second round that he got clipped with, for instance, because of that. So he knew he had to be careful. Whereas with Usyk, he's the sort of guy that will have that high guard. He's very acutely aware of his angles, and he's very quick at changing the level when exiting. So he would land from range to the body and then pivot out and get out, and that southpaw situation would mean that he'd have to be careful from that wide left hook, but he was able to take away Anthony Joshua's left hook. Usyk's very experienced in those situations. He would set a tempo, he'd be landing and rising backhands from the trajectory of an up jab. So that fight I think is all wrong for Ngannou. Then you've got somebody like Anthony Joshua. AJ can step out in straight lines. The difference is, as you saw against Franklin, he'll always have quite a high guard. He's not like Fury, who's going to get out and try and hide behind the shoulder, and whilst more often than not it can work, sometimes you can get clipped. With AJ, he would be stepping out with that high guard. Is Ngannou's power going to carry through the guard of Anthony Joshua? It's not impossible for him to get caught and get taken out, but we've also seen AJ has some really nice lateral movement with his feet against Andy Ruiz. He could be getting Ngannou to reset. He'd be able to land a lot more activity or use more activity, because this was quite a low activity fight with Fury and Ngannou. AJ can potentially be more active by using the jab, using that lateral movement and keeping it long and trying to stay out of danger. Like I said, Ngannou does have long arms. You can't rule him out. But I think Anthony Joshua would be favourite, and I think Eddie Hearn's aware of that too. If you notice, Eddie Hearn stopped talking about Deontay Wilder. He's talking a lot more about Zhang and a lot more about Ngannou now. Do you know why that is? Because he thinks that they caused shocks that have basically risen their stocks to unfair levels. Tyson Fury looked like he's never put on a pair of boxing gloves. AJ would take him out in under 6 rounds. That's the viewpoint of Eddie Hearn. In other words, he thinks that these two guys have catapulted their status up without actually being great fighters. So now he's seeing an opportunity. So I've got a feeling that they're going to pursue that fight. I think we're going to see AJ and Ngannou next. I don't think we're going to see AJ Wilder. But the reason we're going to see that is because they've seen enough gaps there now, the way they think AJ would handle Ngannou. How about Deontay Wilder? Well, there's rumours of Deontay Wilder being in talks to fight Ngannou in an MMA cage with MMA rules. This was reported on the MMA Hour. But in a boxing ring, it's also interesting in different ways. Wilder's able to throw that long 1-2 from far out, and he likes to step in, so he'll be all the way out of range. So Ngannou, who's looking to time the entry and look for that left hook, Wilder collapses the pocket faster than Fury, and he's not going to come in too close. He throws that long right hand from range, and Fury landed a lot of 1-2s on Francis Ngannou. If that was a Deontay Wilder, maybe he takes him out. Antithetically, Wilder is easier to hurt, I guess you could say, than Fury. He's a skinnier, smaller man. We've seen him wobbled on a few occasions. Fury, of course, stopped him. You saw Ortiz hurt him. You've seen a few guys hurt him. He's got great powers of recovery and an incredible heart. But if a big puncher lands and can clean you out with one shot, he can. So the point I'm making here is Ngannou's going to have a puncher's chance against all these guys, but stylistically, so far, they all seem to be wrong for him. The ones that might be interesting, though, think of somebody like Efe Ajagba, a big puncher who's not particularly mobile. He'll be there to be found. So now you're talking about a guy who might rely on that right hand for power in a Jagba against a guy whose chin seems to be indestructible, who can hurt you when a Jagba's not particularly defensively astute. I don't rate a Jagba that highly, I have to be real with you. But because he's got a bit of a name, that's a position whereby Ngannou might be looking at it and thinking, listen, you've got a bit of a derby here as well. He's Nigerian, I'm Cameroonian. Let's get this on. This is going to capture the imagination of Africa too. That could be an area where Ngannou has real success. You've got a guy like Jared Anderson. Anderson is very athletic. He leans back a lot though with shots. And as you're leaning back, you saw Charles Martin catch him with straight shots. Jared Anderson, unless he fixes certain technical errors, he's an accident waiting to happen. And that accident could very well be Francis Ngannou in any given moment. I don't expect Ngannou to be winning much of that fight. But in any given moment, he could time him. You've also got guys like Zhilei Zhang. Now, he's obviously a southpaw, which changes things a little bit. But you saw that he switched at one point, Francis Ngannou against Tyson Fury. Fury switched to southpaw too, and he didn't look crazily out of his depth, but Fury wasn't fighting particularly well as a southpaw. He was rusty fighting in that southpaw position. Zhang would be a lot better at doing that. The point is, Zhang's a big man as well, and he carries short power. Is Ngannou sure that Zhang can't put a dent in him? Because Joe Joyce was sure, and look how that played out. But we've also seen Zhilei Zhang hurt. The problem is Zhilei Zhang's actually a lot more defensively astute up close at mid-range than a lot of people give him credit for. I'd have to fancy Zhilei Zhang in that situation. Filip Hrgović, that's an interesting one, because Hrgović has become more immobile as time's gone by, and he started to rely a little bit more on mass and clattering guys. That didn't work for Tyson Fury against Francis Ngannou. What's to say that it's going to work for Filip Hrgović? And he gets touched a lot more these days. Again, he showed a great chin against Zhilei Zhang. Maybe Ngannou carries that different type of power. Who knows? Martin Bakole puts his hands together very well, very fluid, a very, very big man. You'd have to fancy Bakole to overwhelm Ngannou with volume. But Martin Bakole does have this thing whereby when he's walking towards you, his feet will cross one another. And if Ngannou can be leaning back and then change the trajectory of his movement quickly to collapse the pocket and come in, something MMA fighters are very good at because they have to be able to take quick steps back and back in to avoid kicks, he could potentially land on Bakole as Bakole's off balance. And we saw when Bakole did have a crisis against Michael Hunter, it didn't go well. Was that just a bad night? Or is he there for the taking if somebody really puts it on him? In addition to that, when Martin Bakole's letting go of fluid combinations, his hands are often low when he's actually shooting the shots, which leaves him open potentially to being caught in between his own punches. And he gets the puncher like Ngannou, who's got great timing. That's dangerous. Otto Wallin, a very, very talented mover, a southpaw, good technical boxer. Doesn't seem to be elite, but he's very durable. And so if he's durable and he's a really good mover, he could start to potentially bamboozle Ngannou. And we know that he's been in there now with Tyson Fury. He's also been in there with Murat Gassiev, who's a puncher. And no one's really put a dent in Otto Wallin. He also fought a guy called Adrian Granat when he was coming up. He had 14 knockouts from his 15 wins. Well, Wallin won the fight on points. So he was able to outbox a big puncher like that. So we know he's durable. We've seen it multiple times of his career. If Ngannou can't take him out, he's going to be able to deal with a good technical boxing southpaw. These are all question marks, right? And I'm interested in seeing him in the ring with a whole bunch of people. The point I'm making, though, to get to the summary here, people have now seen a blueprint. They're going to be prepared for Francis Ngannou. So don't suddenly think this guy's ready to take over the heavyweight division. Thomas might disagree. He might see him as a guy that's going to be right there among the top echelons of the heavyweight division. My position is that whilst he has some nice attributes and he could be a threat to anybody on any given night, there's too many holes there. That's just my opinion. I don't think he's going to take over, but he's earned a shot at one of the big boys. Let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, the right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut notifications button. Take care. God bless.